both Google and Apple have tossed around the idea of taking the Twitter app off of their app stores if they do any weird shit, right?
Really?
Like, at no point was banning the New York Post and the Hunter Biden laptop story on the table for taking them off of a platform.
Yeah.
But Parler just existing was enough to take them off a platform.
Yep.
So, we'll see what happens. I mean, luckily, Elon Musk is he chugs as much Chinese dong as anybody.
Sure.
So I don't think that'll happen, frankly. Like, he's a very powerful person, not just because he's rich or runs companies that are at the intersection of all these fucking things, but also because he's got just a lot of Chinese dick around him.
Yeah, I don't do a Kate Blanchett, Bob. I have a feeling you might, though, like a really over-the-top Kate Blanchett.
Kate, an impression?
Yeah, I can't. I do a lot of impressions. Kate Blanchett.
I don't think Kate Blanchett is one.
Anyways, you don't think you can pull that off, Bob?
I don't think so.
I'm giving you a lot of credit here.
You are. That's a random, but
your acting chops are impressive, Bob, and I didn't know if you could pull out a Kate Blanchett.
Everybody does like a fucking Christopher Walken and a Mike Tyson. Nobody does Kate Blanchett. Why would they?
I refused to doing stand-up growing up just because everybody did it. You're right. It's hacky to do a Walken. But Kate Blanchett posted, "This is dangerous. This is very dangerous." Now that Elon Musk has taken over Twitter. And I wrote, this is on Variety and on Facebook, which is rarely used anymore. And I just wrote, is it dangerous because the other party is now running it? Like, what makes it dangerous now all of a sudden? And that's what I'm trying to think when I read all these tweets from people who are like, oh, this is terrible. This is awful. Well, then boycott it or get off the platform. That's exactly what you said to Republicans after Trump was removed. Go find another platform. Well, they tried, and then they ripped that one down too.
Yeah.
With Twitter, I don't think Apple or Google could do it. By the way, in that meeting on Monday night, Dan, I was talking about the Twitter thing, and they were like, that's not the worst. They by far said Google and YouTube were the worst. They were like, if you were able to really peel back the layers of what was going on there, they would be the worst by far. I don't know if you've noticed it with yours. Well, I think you started a new one after the old one, but with mine, I've gained 2,500 followers since the acquisition happened officially, about 36 hours ago. A lot of conservatives have gained a ton of followers. Tucker Carlson came back to the platform. So a lot of people are coming back. Will people leave? I don't really know. I mean, I look at Twitter as probably the best source for news, the quickest. Because if something happens like an earthquake or something else, rather than turn on the TV, some asshole on Twitter, along with 50 other assholes, would be like, oh my God, there was an earthquake in LA. Did you feel that?
Yeah.
And that's the fastest way for news. And I feel like with shootings and, bombs going off, I mean, I think with Ukraine, that's where I found out the news first.
It's also the best place for bad news to be corrected because it's crowdsourced. And if the platform's not interfering with it, you can just look down the chain and somebody will say, no, this is not true, and here's why.
Yeah.
You can find, if you're a reasonable human being that has any intent on participating in reality, you can probably find it on there, right? But that's not the case, or it wasn't until a couple of days ago anyways, because there's a very... It's one of two things. Either there was a lot more manual manipulation of what's happening on Twitter day to day, or I've heard Dave Rubin say it. He'll be on the show Tuesday next week. I've heard James Lindsay say it. You mentioned it the other day that they're shredding documents.
That's what it feels like, certainly behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And, some higher-ups over at some other conservative organizations said the exact same thing, that it is turned into boiler room over there, and they're trying to shred documents, get rid of all the blockers they've put on the back of this. Right. I don't know what the technical term is. I've also read that Elon Musk wants to make it open source.
The algorithm, yeah.
Yeah. So ironically, a few weeks back, I had dinner with the guy who invented open source internet. I would love to get him on the show if he would do it. He listens to the show, so if you're out there, Greg, why don't you go ahead and text me? And we'd love to have you on as a guest to explain what that would mean for Twitter specifically. Because I'm curious now as to what it's going to be like if information is truly open and there isn't algorithms and there isn't shadow bans on people or just the hatred algorithms too, where all these people like Robert Reich show up in your feed first and physically force you to interact with people you hate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all goes. I mean, one of the key tenets of feudalism is keeping the general public ignorant, right? So the Bible until the 16th century was only translated in Latin, or not translated, but it was only fucking written in Latin. Right?
Why?
To keep the plebs from being able to understand it. They spoke common languages like Middle English and then English or Italian, German, whatever the fuck, right? French.
Right.
But they didn't read in Latin for sure. Only the people that went through the seminary and became educated learned Latin. So they were the fucking arbiters of God on earth. Nobody else knew except for what they heard from these people. And now...
So what you're saying is freedom of speech never existed?
No, it hasn't. It's for a period of time, yes. When
would you say that is? Because, I mean, if you're going back to the Bible, like everything you're saying makes complete sense, by the way. But if you're going back to then...
Well, it's whatever the epicenter of social life is what you want to control. So if it's religion, then you want to control. You want to be the arbiter of the religion. If it's politics, you want to be the arbiter of politics, and that's what these news organizations have been doing since long before Trump showed up. I mean, this stuff's been going on for a very long time. There have been collusions between, as I mentioned, Rutherford B. Hayes. You can read about it in The Master Switch. There have been collusions between the press and government for years because somebody wants to control the access to that thing, right? Because if you can, you don't need to hack voting machines if you can hack somebody's brain. I say that a lot. And if their social diet is to know what's going on in politics and moralize and fucking virtue signal based on that, and you can control the information that they're getting, then you have hacked their mind effectively.
Right.
It's now a form of digital feudalism where that person is ignorant to the reality of the situation because everything that's going on is above their level. They're just being fed narrative at that point, which is the same as being fed the Bible in English instead of the Latin that it was written in, for example, or I'm sorry, the Greek or Hebrew that was written in. There's no escape plan for this shit, by the way. Like, the solution to the intellectual feudalism was to teach people how to read. And then they would come up with their own interpretations. Things like Calvinism and Lutherans started to pop up. Not the COE. That was just because Henry wanted to fuck and have male babies. But I don't know what I don't know what literacy we're going to be able to teach people now that fixes this issue, right? Like it's how to process information and build ideas based on the information you've processed, the Socratic method, essentially, but that's gone. Like, there's no room for that shit anymore. So I don't know what the next step is. I don't know what the step out of this digital feudalism is. It's fucked up.
Well, what I find fascinating is the bigger and bigger all this shit gets for us in the shows and everything else, and these guests that we get to have every day. You just had Douglas Murray on American Party, and we've had some of the brightest minds on this show for one of the dumbest people, wink, talking about myself on this one. But the interesting part about it is we have more access to information than I've ever had in my life to things that are going on behind the scenes. And that's why I love doing this job every day, because you never get a chance to chat with people about this. But with that information, it makes me more and more paranoid too, because when you're walking around the world just as a dummy living, your normal life, and you're not really thinking about algorithms or like you said, being controlled psychologically. Because you're right, it is way better to control somebody's mind than at the voter box, because that eventually changes their mind when they're voting. And it's a long play. Real long play.
If you defeat somebody physically, then they'll do what you tell them. But if you defeat them mentally, they'll tell others to do what you're telling them.
Yeah.
That's the difference, right? It becomes endemic at that point to society. And that's kind of where we are now. And it should make you nervous and paranoid that agencies beyond your control are intentionally collecting power, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you want to visualize that, just think of it as your neighbor is building a weapon in their front yard and it's pointed at you, right? And they keep telling you, oh, that's not for you. That's just in case. Like, in case what?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you should be very suspicious of anybody that wants to have control over you in general. But conservatives aren't against, in principle, aren't against big government because of the inefficiencies, of which there are many, obviously, or just intrinsically because they're conservative. That's not the case. They're against big government because government is a necessary evil, and those things are to be kept as small as possible, right? Like radiation for cancer, for example. Radiation is also making you sick, but it's going to kill the cancer, and then we'll get you better from the radiation sickness later. You know what I mean?
Yeah.